Carla with Race to Walk, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 books on cultural apologetics. But before we get started, a little bit about this channel. Here we share good thoughts about good words. And on Fridays, I host a live Bible study on Instagram at Race to Walk, and then I publish 2 videos a week. I publish a replay of that Bible study with some study aids, and I also publish a video about books. So if you are interested in either of those things, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with a friend. So before we get started, what is cultural apologetics? So if you don't know what apologetics is, it is the area of study about presenting arguments and reasons for the truth of the Christian faith. So some of the very well-known Christian apologists are William Lane Craig, who focuses on more philosophical arguments. Also Lee Strobel, who has a lot of very popular level apologetic books like The Case for Christ, A Case for Faith, A Case for Miracles. And so those are some of the more well-known people. If you look at the apologetics category on Amazon, most of the time the #1 book on that will be Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I do have another video on my top 5 apologetics books, and that is, I think I have that one listed as my #1 book on general apologetics. So anyway, that's what most people know of as apologetics. Now, cultural apologetics is a little bit different. There is a book that was published a couple years ago by Paul Gould called Cultural Apologetics, and this is his description of cultural apologetics, and this is from his book. So cultural apologetics, according to Paul Gould, works to renew the Christian voice, conscience, and imagination so that Christianity would be seen as reasonable and desirable. Personally, I think that's a horrible description. I'm sorry, Dr. Gould. I just think it is. This could be used to describe anything. Evangelism, discipleship training, spiritual formation, and general apologetics. There's nothing, unique about this description. That description can be used to apply to a lot of different things. Now, I'm going to insert a clip here from an interview that Zach Schmal, who is the editor of An Unexpected Journal, and I did with my friend Clark Wigner on his podcast.
What is cultural apologetics? How is it different, I guess, from philosophical apologetics? And what is the aim or the goal of cultural apologetics?
Sure. So when I think of cultural apologetics, I oftentimes think about how in our culture right now, there's a lot of times where there's not even a baseline of, let's say, biblical literacy. I mean, we have biblical literacy problems in our churches. And so the culture at large, it's even more so. And so when I think about cultural apologetics, I think about building bridges from the gospel truth, from the biblical truth, to our culture to help people understand, why we believe what we believe and why it makes sense. So I have to refer to it once because I refer to it in everything I ever do. But think about The Lord of the Rings. And
yes,
so I mean, we all know that beautiful scene. It's portrayed in the movie really well with Sam carrying Frodo up Mount Doom at the end because he can't make it himself. Now, there's a truth embedded in that. There's a truth that says, well, number one, it's good to help other people. It's good to overcome evil. It's good to fight to the bitter end and give everything you have. Now, these are all very real biblical truths. Our culture sees that movie and they realize, hey, these are really good things. Like, these are good. And so our job is to help them understand why they're good. And they're good because they reflect God's truth into our world. So I think of that as the role of the apologist or the cultural apologist. The philosophical apologist, in my opinion, does exactly the same thing. Their arguments are very similar. The difference is they tend to use terminology that's a lot different. It's more of an approach that's been used in more formal academic pursuits. And not to dismiss that, not to discount that. I love that, but it's not where everyone's at. And everyone doesn't resonate with that type of argumentation. So for me, I see cultural apologetics as kind of a parallel path to help people get, obviously, to the gospel truth. That's what we're all here to do. But on the flip side, we're helping them connect on a level that maybe they don't want to see a logical proof. But formal logic might mean nothing to them. Right. But maybe seeing it portrayed on screen, they're like, oh, that makes sense to me. So that's kind of how I see it's the same goal. We're pursuing the same truth. We're just using slightly different methods. And it actually makes me think, and I pulled this up in our first ever issue. I kind of wrote a letter to open the first issue, the Abolition of Man one, that Carla held up for you, and I wrote right near the end of my letter, we hope to show you by our work, inspired by the abolition of man, that utilizing the imagination and reason together can expose the dangerous consequences of certain popular ideas in our society of disordered desires. So, again, it's the same idea. We're exposing falsehood. We're leading people to truth, just like philosophical apologists. But I think we're doing it in a slightly different way by bringing together reason and the imagination.
Right.
So that's Zach's description. And the journal that we both work on, An Unexpected Journal, is dedicated to cultural apologetics. So I think a better explanation of what cultural apologetics is, general apologetics is about presenting reasons. But in order for those reasons to matter at all, somebody has to care. There has to be meaning to them. And there has to be this desire for something, right? So when I think about cultural apologetics, it's about meeting people where they're at and using things that they understand to explain things that they don't. And it's really more like a bridge from what they know to what they haven't yet experienced or understand. So Jesus is really the ultimate cultural apologist. When he came and preached, he didn't teach like a Greek philosopher. He told stories. He said the kingdom of heaven is like. It is like. And he used illustrations that they were very familiar with. We spent almost the entire last year in our Bible study on the parables of Jesus. And those stories that he told illustrated spiritual truth. They illustrated either the nature of God or an aspect of God's plan, or what being a true disciple looked like. Someone who really sought after God. He used those stories to illustrate what truth, justice, and true righteousness actually look like. And as we discovered, as we went through those stories last year, most of those weren't stories that Jesus came up with on his own. Most of them were stories that were common in the culture. They were either common Jewish teachings or sayings, and Jesus would tweak them a little bit. Or he used some of Aesop's fables. He used these elements in both the Greek and Jewish culture to explain. He used the familiar to illustrate the unfamiliar. And that's what cultural apologetics. So this is basic marketing 101. You create a desire for something, so the benefits, and then you list the features, which gives them the reasons to do the thing that they already want to do. So there's different types of cultural apologetics. You can look at the Chronicles of Narnia or the Lord of the Rings that illustrate, aspects of God's truth. And Lewis himself was actually drawn to Christ through these stories. If you read his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, he explains he loved these Christian writers. He still did not accept God or that there was a God at all, but he was so drawn to these stories. And George MacDonald's book, Phantastes, played a huge role in his life. I actually have a video on that. But he had accepted the truth, the benefit of the thing. He had this desire for this thing that was, but the reasons he fought against for quite a while, between the time when he picked up Phantastes at a train station to the time when he accepted Christ, there were 8 years. So he was drawn to God through the desire, but it took a lot longer time for the reasons to really break through that final wall. So this huge focus on reasons and arguments, it's a lot of times like traditional apologetics, people almost look at it as a street fight. You can't beat somebody down into accepting Jesus. They have to desire him. They have to be seeking after him with their whole heart. And Romans 10:9 says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. We have to have this desire for him. And so the reasons just basically clarify what it is that we're desiring. If you think the reasons alone are going to get someone there, it's not. So there's kind of two purposes to this video. One is I want to kind of really explain a little bit more what cultural apologetics is. And also I want to ask for your help because, like I said, An Unexpected Journal is dedicated to cultural apologetics. But the thing is, most of the time when I'm listing it on Amazon, I don't list it in the apologetics category. If somebody says, I'm looking for a book on apologetics, they're not normally going to be looking for this type of journal. They're looking for the William Lane Craigs or the Lee Strubbles or the Nabil Qureshi's, those types of books, those propositional arguments, those reasons, those fact-based books. So what I normally will list the journal in are things like literary criticism, comparative literature, analysis on, fairy tales or myths. And depending on the topic, it will be different. Like we did a medieval issue, we did science fiction, and so I do all different categories. But what I really want is I want to have a browse category on Amazon for cultural apologetics, so you can find these types of. So this is my plan. I'm going to start campaigning Amazon for a cultural apologetics browse category. So my goal is to come up with a list of 100 that I can present to Amazon and say, hey, explain what it is, why it needs its own category, and then suggest a list of books that they can list under that new category. I have about 50 right now, so I'm going to list 10 of them. I don't know that it's necessarily top 10, it's just 10 that I know that are actually cultural apologetics. If you know of other ones that would fit in the cultural apologetics category, please let me know. And put them in the comments, because I would appreciate some help building this list so I can ask Amazon to create this new browse category. So the first one is Apologetics in the Christian Imagination by Holly Ordway, and she was one of the founding professors at Houston Baptist University's Cultural Apologetics program. When they first started it, it focused on cultural apologetics. They do now also have a philosophical track. Number 2 is Cultural Apologetics by Paul Gould. Like I said, I don't necessarily agree with his definition of it, but I haven't read the book. Maybe his one sentence definition isn't that great, and maybe he is arguing for the same thing. I don't know. We do have a review of this book on An Unexpected Journal if you want to read that. Narrative Apologetics by Alistair McGrath. Again, I have not read this. One of the interesting things about these books, if you look at the reviews on Amazon, people who like the traditional apologetics books are a lot of times really, really bothered by this whole idea of telling truth through story, or, bridging gaps between what people value and explaining how that goodness is actually an aspect of God. Really, really bothers them. They're like, you just have to just explain the gospel. They first have to understand why they even want to hear it to begin with. But anyway, that's kind of the whole point. That's why we need a category for this. Okay, number 4, Telling a Better Story by Joshua Chatraw. I actually have this book. We are going to be reading this in my book club. By the time I publish it, we'll probably be in the middle of this. So the subtitle, How to Talk About God in a Skeptical Age. And I haven't read it. This is another one the reviews, like the just traditionalists don't like, which tells me it might be good. The one thing that I noticed as I was flipping through this, so if you've watched some of my other videos, one of my pet peeves is when they don't have footnotes. This one has notes at the end of the chapter. Come on, can we just go with some footnotes? This is why publishers do this, because then they only have to format the book once. They have one format for both the print and digital. If they go with footnotes, then they have to have a separate format for the digital versions. Just quit being cheap. Just do it. Can we just have some footnotes, Zondervan? Oh, so annoying. So annoying. Number 5, Reimagining Apologetics, The Beauty of Faith in a Secular Age by Justin Bailey. Have not read that one, but it sounds like it would fit into the cultural apologetics category. Deeper Magic, The Theology Behind the Writings of C.S. Lewis by Donald T. Williams. Now, Donald T. Williams has written a lot about all of the Inklings. He has several other books, too, that are kind of helping me fill out this initial list of 100. And he's submitted quite a bit to An Unexpected Journal. He actually has a piece in our issue on the Imago Dei that's coming out in March. When Athens Met Jerusalem by John Mark Reynolds. And this is actually a book that we study in the apologetics program. John Mark Reynolds was actually the person that launched the apologetics program at HBU. He also started the film program there, and they are both just amazing, amazing programs. He did write an article for us in our Planet Narnia issue about how the whole apologetics program came about and really what his goal was in making it different from the other apologetics programs. Most of them are focused on philosophy. HBU's program is pretty unique among the colleges that offer degrees in apologetics. Number 8 is The Philosophy of Tolkien, The Worldview Behind the Lord of the Rings by Peter Kreeft. Haven't read that one. But I know a lot of people have. I think Zach mentioned this is one of the first ones that he read because Zach's really into Lord of the Rings. Number 9, The Poetics of Evil, Towards an Aesthetic Theodicy by Philip Talon. Dr. Talon is actually, I think he's like, I don't know what his title is, but he's like the head person of the apologetics program at HBU. He writes a lot about horror. We have an essay in our Film and Music issue from summer of 2018 where he wrote on The Witch, and he shows how even movies like that can be a vehicle for evangelism. And then number 10 is On the Shoulders of Hobbits by Louis Markos. And Dr. Markos has written quite a few books that would fit in this category too. He actually wrote the book with an overview on apologetics called Apologetics for the 21st Century. I talk about that in my video, The Book That Changed My Life, because it was actually part of the reason that I got into HBU's apologetics program. So anyway, those are 10 of mine. And obviously, I would list all the issues of an unexpected journal in this. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, any suggestions, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.